what I see very clearly is uncertainty and litigation, because what this ruling has done is certainly not to define any standard for taxation over the internet, and it certainly is not a green light for states to start taxing however they want online retails or force out-of-state sellers to collect taxes for them. All that it does is that basically it gets rid of the one clear signal we had, which was the nexus one. The nexus, the physical presence as a standard, and because it didn't go ahead and tell us, you know, what the threshold was or what the new rule was, and all of this is going to have to be litigated. And while we had a clear rule before, we don't have it. But I think it's a mistake for people to understand this as saying that this is go ahead, green light, you can force out-of-state company to collect taxes. And by the way, this is a good thing, because I actually think it is problematic to have an out-of-state company being forced to do the bidding for a state government. And by the way, I'm also worried about down the road what this principle does at the level of international taxes, because that's what the European wants to do with us.
Tom, I assume Veronique gave us a lot to think about there, and I assume you disagree largely with what she says. Explain, if I'm correct, why, and is she correct that this will lead to litigation, or does it inevitably lead to legislation?
Well, we're thrilled with today's decision. We think it's a victory for free market principles. You know, fundamentally, retailers, physical retailers and online retailers were operating in an uneven playing field, and the Supreme Court leveled the playing field. We do think that the South Dakota law is a good one, that it creates appropriate safeguards for small businesses. We would encourage states to follow those principles. And I do think you will see coming out of this a number of states using today's ruling and the South Dakota piece of legislation as a framework to adopt similar laws, which we would encourage. I think this is fundamentally a victory for free market principles and just levels the playing field, which is consistent with what you do in a capitalistic society.
But do you get Veronique's point about the whole issue of federalism, that a state is reaching across state lines? Well, it could be problematic, right?
Well, I think there was already inappropriate federal intervention, because they created an inequity in the nation's sales tax collection system, number one. Number two, that this is really just requiring and facilitating the collection of a sales tax that's already due. You know, use taxes are required on purchases. This just facilitates the collection. So all it simply does is create a level playing field between physical and online retailers.
Veronique, your answer.
Yeah, I mean, if we redefine free market as meaning, you know, the end of tax competition and higher taxes, sure. I mean, Tom is right, but this is not what it actually means. And by the way, a level playing field they had in the States, because you have a sales tax for the purchase that you buy in the States, but also consumers who buy online are subjected to your user. To the user tax, and this to me is fine. It's like you tell the people inside your state what kind of tax rules that they are subjected to. There was a playing field. Now, people didn't necessarily file their user tax, but it doesn't mean that it gives the right to the states to reach across state lines. Especially, I mean, everyone is thinking about Amazon, but Amazon already has a nexus everywhere where there's a sales tax and was collecting sales tax. What we're really talking about is small businesses. And while it is true that the South Dakota one offers protection for small businesses, right? The ruling, if my understanding is correct, doesn't say that everyone can do what South Dakota does. And I think, and there's all these uncertainty. We don't know what a small means, what is too small, what threshold is.
We're short on time, folks. Tom, a final thought quickly.
Well, I think from a pragmatic standpoint, states will look to today's ruling and the South Dakota pieces of legislation as a guide and a framework to create their own legislation with their own states. I think it's just consistent with free market principles.
Hey there, thanks for checking out CNBC on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all of the day's biggest stories. You can also click on any of the videos around me to watch the latest from CNBC. Thanks for watching.